I wanted to add is, adding to what Deepa also told. How much do children buy? It's always with the parent or through the parent. I think, and then it becomes the parents' moral responsibility that they are able to screen out things that they think may not be appropriate or appropriate. So I think that decision also will influence this. And secondly, like what she said, even now, my son's school books I'm only seeing Western authors lessons. There are hardly any Indian authors lessons or chapters. Just one or two we might have, but mostly it's always about some author from the West. Even the most recent authors from the West are easily incorporated. How many textbooks have Indian authors? Whether for a non-detail or a chapter. So even at the education level, I think exposing at a younger age will help them to realize that yes, we have Indian authors as well who can write. I think all this exposure they get very late, probably once they start working or when they go to college, is when they start realizing okay, there are local authors who also write.
Yeah, I think the another reason why Western authors features is that publishers also try to make money and they prefer books which are out of copyright. So they will tend to get free material instead of fresh material created by the local authors.
Here I would like to add that Sandhya can help us. Next time when she's having this, she's talking about her support services, she should add psychological counseling and then parental counseling so that they can buy books by Indian writers.
And there's a very strong, very valid reason, because children can identify with stories which deal with their own experience, especially when you're talking about a realistic fiction.
Yeah.
Because there's always the issue when we read Enid Blyton, we would be wondering, what does a scone taste like, oily pie, or everything else, and that's something which I don't understand. And the textbook business, they really are not adventurous at all. I think they're always afraid that the teachers will say, "Oh no, what is this? Where did you pick up this story from?" So that's the problem. We, as a people, we are very conventional. We are too traditional minded. But one point I'd like to add is about sending these books abroad. Now there's another issue cropping up with Indian children who have grown up in foreign countries, because my daughters themselves said, I sent one of my books with myths, and she said, the child finds them very frightening. Because Indian children have grown up, they're exposed to those stories, but the children find it frightening. And another friend of mine, she said, look, I'll buy your folktale book, but I'll read it before sending it for my grandchildren, because I don't know how they're going to react. So you see, this is another issue that we need to think about.
Yeah. So when you talk about realistic fiction, of late I'm finding that there are a lot of girl protagonists. And I've also heard from many of my friends that the moment they talk about realistic fiction, they'll say that turn this character into a girl, right? And there have been cases where manuscripts have got rejected because now everybody seems to be focused on girl power. So my question is that what happens to the boys? Where are their role models? Do you think this is a fad? And how do you think you should balance this issue?
I think Deepaji should answer this first.
Okay. No, I definitely feel that this issue should be balanced. And it was the opposite way around in the beginning, especially where adventure stories were concerned. And if we remember Enid Blyton, how the girls were always following and the boys in the gang were leading. And I recall when I began writing, I used to contribute to a wonderful magazine called Target. And the Rosalind Wilson, she was a wonderful guide. So once she made a remark, she said, the girls in your story are not, playing a very active role. And then so this was, I'm talking about 35 years back. Now, because of people feel that books on girl power will have more of an appeal. I'm surprised. I hadn't heard this, that people are being asked to change the protagonist into a female one. But any story that's written should be written naturally. That's what I feel. It should grow out of you organically. And boys definitely need role models. And the fact is, boys often shy away from reading because there are not enough stories about them. So, uh, in my books, okay, I've focused a lot on girl power, but some of my protagonists, where the situation demands it, like for example, Caravan to Tibet, it's a boy product, because the historical facts, etc., called for it. And when there's a story that's forming, or it's coming out from real life, so I definitely would choose the protagonist, the way it happened, and not just try to substitute a female character for a boy. This should be according to the situation. So, what do you think?
I think there's a broader issue there. This turning the boy into a girl, I mean, the protagonist or whatever and all that, this is all very gimmicky. And it is like the obsession to write for the market. I always believe that the writer should write by instinct, not for the market. If it's a great book, it'll be a great book. I mean, you don't have to say because the trend is writing for the girls or empowerment of girls, you should write for that. If the trend is something else, you should write for that. So this kind of gimmicky tactics in the long run will never work. Short-term success you might have. And in most of my books, I've tried my best to balance, because for the last 29 years, ever since my daughter was born, and 25 years ever since my son was born, my entire life has been trying to balance between my son and daughter, because each thing that I take, I love the other one more. So it's always been a balancing act.
Dr. Sandhya, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, I actually wanted to clarify, which they already told, is that the reading audience, is there a clear gender demarcation that either girls read more or boys read more? So that's something I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to ask Deepa that do you think that, like in the movies, do we need parental guidance or screening while selecting books for children?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Parental guidance.
Parental guidance.
While selecting.
Movies, no. So, like that for children, do you think we should?
You see, that is already been vetted by the editor and the publisher. Ramin knows how much of screening is done of our original writing, and where children's literature is concerned, both editors and publishers are very sensitive to these issues, and it's not only in our country. I remember once I sent a story about lesbianism to an American magazine. It was a young adult magazine. I used to contribute regularly, and they didn't take it. And later on, they explained. They said, some of the parents object to it. So there is that censoring, I would call it. That censoring takes place while the story is being edited or accepted. So writers already have to be cautious, or that either it will be rejected or something will be edited out.
But I think if once the parent and child go to the bookstore, if the parent allows the child to pick up the book within reasonable boundaries, the child will read the book, because the very act of choosing a book is a thrill for the child. So too much of parental guidance will turn him off. And if you really want to indulge in guidance, it should be reverse guidance. If you want a child to read the book, you please tell him, don't read this book, he will read it, he or she.
That's exactly reverse.
But from the psychological point of view, when it comes to gender difference or something, there is enough research to say that whether it is intelligence wise, or the capability wise, there is hardly any gender difference in the cognitive development and all. It's not like girls do grow up differently, boys grow up differently. It's not at all like that. It's only after they reach adolescence when the identity issues start coming is when the actual difference start. So how far should the children find it? Okay, I will read only if the hero is a boy, or I'll read if the hero is only a girl. I think it shouldn't matter if parents need clarification on that. I think it shouldn't matter at all. First of all, and secondly, even now, at least in the urban settings, I don't want to say it for the entire country, but at least in the urban settings, there is hardly any difference in the way they raise girls or they raise boys. They give equal opportunities, so much freedom to choose their own hobby or exposure to whether they want to get into sports or arts or what. So I think the differentiation as such, probably now we are having that generation of parents who don't want to, give that to their kids that, okay, you are only a girl, so you can do this, you're a boy, you can do this. So they don't want that. And at least till that school level, I'm seeing they hardly differentiate. The exam pressure that they face is equal. The peer pressure that they face is equal. So, from the audience point of view, it is not different. So publishers should not worry about this. That's what I think.
Dr. Sandhya, I noticed that when children are in the age group of 3 to 8, they are ready to experiment. They like to read a whole lot of books. Try out different genres. But when they turn into pre-teens and teens, their book choices are dependent on their peers. Why does that happen? And is there something we can do to encourage them, to have their own thoughts and experiment with book reading of different genres?
Yeah. See, from the developmental point of view, again, the psychosocial development, there are different stages, the toddler and the pre-adolescent and the adolescent and the adult. So there are different stages in, across the lifespan. And there are key people in their life in every stage. For a toddler, it's usually the immediate, the parent and the grandparents, and the pre-teen or the pre-adolescent is where it is more of the neighbor and friends, and it is their immediate circle, plus the teachers probably. But when they become adolescents, it is completely their only significant person in life is the peer. The parent is not there at all in the picture in the chat. Okay. So
that's absolutely.
The parent's job is over, when the child turns 10 or 11. It's more so if the parent wants to gel with the child, they can only when they put on the hat of the friend.
Peer.
Yeah.
Like the peer. So only when the parent act like the peer, they are okay with accepting the parent. So till they reach adulthood, it's only the peer. So, and they will choose peers who are, they will choose their group who are similar to them. Right? So
Yes,
it's not that probably they are attracted to a group of friends who are reading things like them. So, and then probably they will try to catch up with them as well. The need to belong to that group, they have to conform and they have to prove they're still part of that. So it is both ways. One, probably the friends influence their reading habit. Another is they would be attracted to that group only with which they identify. Otherwise, they won't even go near that. Probably temporarily they will be just to act cool. Okay, that gang sounds cool, so I want to be part of it. So whatever they do, I do. But once they realize, no, this is not something that I'm enjoying, or this is not me, or this is not where I'm belonging, immediately they will be shifting to that group where they identify most, and the choice again will. Sometimes they totally stop reading. So because they have to conform. So it's totally the peers were influenced here.
My next question is to the authors. When I talk to parents from metro backgrounds, they always tell me to write books with strong morals and values. When I talk to parents from rural backgrounds, they always tell me to write more of non-fiction, more of realistic fiction, and address issues of casteism, water shortage, land grabbing, child marriages, and all the other issues. Now, how do you balance writing for both these kind of parents?
Well, can I take that question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, there is a divide in publishing and as well as the audience. I think you would agree with that. When
Absolutely,
we
yes.
write, but I think we should write both kinds of stories, because the urban children also need to know about how children from different backgrounds live. Now, you notice with this EWS scheme in schools, there is a kind of an uncomfortable separation among the children. And it's really rather sad to see it, because, of course, it's wonderful because the children who get admission to, a good school, they they're getting a good education, but you notice that they won't attend the birthday parties of their classmates. Sometimes in the beginning, if they're invited, they attend. Later on, as they grow older, they will not be attending birthday parties. They feel that difference. So I think we really need to explore this a lot. And some of my earlier stories were that, because I grew up in a time when as I said, the village and the town were very close by, and there was a lot of interaction. And once a critic pointed out, you always have a bunch of children, and there is a friend from a different background, and it seemed very artificial to her. So I said, look, but that's how I grew up. That was the situation in in my family background. So, but the thing is, there is a big separation in metro, children living in metros. So I think each side needs to be made aware of the kind of life the other is leading in a sensitive and a very natural kind of way. You can't force such stories. You have to feel the story that you're going to write. You have to have very strong emotions about your protagonist. You have to identify with your protagonist. It's not easier said than done, but I think if you try to interact a lot with children from different backgrounds, it can be done. So there should not be a complete separation. And then, because then there is also the separation of language. You'll agree. Children from a rural language background will be reading in their own languages, though everyone is aspirational these days. Everyone wants to, read more and more in English, and there is material available. But the thing is, we have to somehow attempt as writers to blur these differences. So there is more knowledge, and not, that there's that kind of social distrust that exists. We have to try and smooth and level things out. What do you
Ramin,
think?
your thoughts?
Yeah,
What are you?
I would say that the divide, I wouldn't say between rural and urban, I would call it a divide between the metro and the small town India. I grew up in Hyderabad, which is a big town, and I've spent all my working life in a small place like Rourkela, which is it's a small township. And I find that there's a huge difference, and this difference is stressed more by the publishers. I hope I won't get lynched, but there are many publishers who are not interested in these small town kind of stories. The language is different, the culture is different. Sexual exploration starts in a big town, in a metro, possibly at 12 or 13. But here it's much, much later, anxiety, curiosity, or whatever. Then the aspirations are slightly different. The opportunities are slightly different. My daughter, who grew up in Rourkela, when she went to Bangalore, she had to face a lot of these kind of snide remarks and all that, though she was a topper and etc. So I would appeal to the publishers not to have this social distancing. This was started much before the lockdown and COVID-19. Our publishers have been practicing this social distancing for quite some time. Small town India is as important, if not more important. not only about Dhoni and Kangana Ranaut and all that, but about many others also. So let us bridge both the writers and the publishers have to bridge this gap and take the complete perspective of India, not Bharat versus India, small town, big town, and stuff like that.
I
I have a
find
question for Shamla. I have a question for Shamla. She's been asking questions. Please give us a chance to ask you a question. Now, you are
Okay.
an award-winning writer on realistic fiction. So
Yeah.
you share your experiences with us.
Let me tell you what it was. This was the book which won the CBT
CBT,
award.
CBT
Yeah,
award, yeah.
yeah. So when I first pitched it to an editor, she said this book is about the dangers of befriending strangers on social media. So when I first pitched it to an editor, she said this sounds like a plot from from crime, so one of the crime serials on television. And the first thing which hit me was that which author is, I have to make a list of editors who don't watch this particular serial, so that maybe my chances of pitching will be better. And yeah, so after a few rejections, it worked. So I think finding the right person who believes, because there's so much of reality outside that I think sometimes editors don't want a book, addressing that grim reality.
But it's so important, to address it, because
Yeah,
so many
absolutely.
children are in danger
Yeah,
of, getting sucked into that kind of situation.
yeah. You can't cocoon
Interesting.
yourself for the children. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mention it, because I had thought of a similar kind of a plot. What happens when you befriend a stranger on Facebook, and didn't realize that editors were so wary of such stories.
So, Dr. Sandhya, I find that getting books on real issues, it's very difficult now, especially if you deal with issues like rape, incest, casteism, LGBT issues. The publishers are very jittery. Now, even if they take a risk and manage to get these books published, and these books enter schools, parents, the parent union, the PTA has a problem with this, and they try to get these books banned. Now, a child is exposed to much more of stuff, of the real life on school playgrounds, the internet, the social media. Why are Indian parents trying to shield their child, from these real issues? Why can't they just accept, because I think books are it's a safe bet, it's a safe environment for them to introduce a topic to a child, and talk to them about how do you address this issue, what are the coping
Absolutely.
mechanisms, what are the alternate perspectives for a particular issue, what are their family values, where do they stand, and I think a whole lot of discussion can stem from that. So why do parents try to shield their children, and what do you have to say to the parents who, protect the child? Because I think children know much more than their parents, because because they don't talk about these issues at home, that doesn't mean they're ignorant. They are aware of much more. They're very careful about what they talk at home.
Yes, I think normalizing, these conversations on these issues, I think is still not happening. Even now, I am scared to talk to my mother about, certain things like even but my children know more. They go for the parade. They know more about these issues than even I do. All right, so I think. One thing, how far are parents? I mean, this discussion keeps happening again and again and again in so many forums when it comes to parenting, etc. Is that how far do they, are they comfortable talking? If they are comfortable at home talking about all this and then have clarified the doubts with their children, I don't think they would have an issue when it is, they're outside as well. But since they are not comfortable talking, and it has been always recommended that children should not learn about all this from news and internet and friends, rather let them learn about it from their parents, or maybe an aunt if not the parent, or a grandparent whom they are comfortable talking about it. So it's always better when they have this discussion with the family members, and many family members are worried that if I talk about this, then I am telling them it's okay for this. But it is not so. So that is what their main concern is, that if I talk about this with my child, then it's like I'm giving my permission, to the child that, yeah, it's okay, this is right, there's nothing wrong. But if you can have a proper conversation, maybe you read up on how to have this conversation first. Even that is important. You can't blatantly just, say without preparing the child. So the way to prepare the child into conversations, and then introducing this, and then sharing their opinions and concerns. If it starts with the family, if that comfort level is there, they need not worry at all. But it's always because they get it outside first 10 years, 13 years, and it's how far can you protect? It's like, it's a bubble wrap, and it's just it's not at all necessary at this generation where we know now what is happening in US. We don't have to wait for the news channels. It just pops up in my phone. All right, and children are more about all these challenges, and it goes viral in days, and all over the world people know when some challenge happens somewhere, everybody wants to do it, and then they do it. So you can't stop this exposure. It will be definitely there, and more so now with the telephone reaching the rural sector. Everybody has access to the phone. Everybody has access to everything in the internet. So the earlier parents start, the better. So once I think they have the conversation, the child is clear about what it actually. Then they don't have to fish for these, curious information outside from unreliable sources, and so these are all the baits, easy baits when. For all the people who are, trying to catch people.
That awful episode, that boys' locker room.
Yes.
That really shows the lack of communication between parents and children. The parents are not even aware that that the children are up to this, and that is, I think, a very tricky aspect of adolescence. That when the parents are cut out of the children's circle, and friends dominate, and peer pressure, and that is the most tricky time, and that is the time when people make a lot of mistakes that will probably haunt them all their lives. So that is something that how can we address these issues in through books, but as Shamla said, the parents associations will try to get that book banned when the need is to discuss these issues more and more.
So we still have 5 minutes, so if all of you can contribute your final thoughts. Ramin?
Yeah. If permitted, I would like to read out a poem on kind of realism.
Okay. Can you wait till we just...
Sure.
Any final thoughts about the book and about your books? Anything else you would like to contribute to the topic? We'll wait till... we will definitely end the session with your poem.
I would really like to say one thing. What Sandhya said was that in this age of Netflix and Amazon Prime, how can you not discuss with your children? It is like the typical ostrich syndrome, And the earlier you do it, and the more you do it, the better it is for all of us, for the individual, for the family, and for the society.
Yeah, Deepa ma'am.
Well, I absolutely agree with what Ramin said, and this is something which has been discussed over and over again. Everything is there. Everything is very graphically present, and still we are too afraid. Parents are too afraid to bring up the something like sex, which they know exists, but they don't want to talk to their children about it. It's like the elephant in the room for them. So it's a real, what should I say, catch-22 situation, because the publishers are afraid to publish books that are very candid on this subject. I think there needs to be more discussion more discussions of the type that we are having. And talking about realistic fiction, I say that we should draw more stories from life, as many more stories as we can. And maybe sometimes very tricky situations can be presented through fantasy, which then, it distances uh, people from the reality. But somewhere, children get the meaning. They do, get the subtext. And that is the whole thing with the fairy tales being so violent, and the violence is far removed, but yet young children are fascinated by fairy tales. So the truth always lies somewhere in between. I always feel.
Dr. Sandhya, I have one last question for you. What are the life skills a child gains by reading realistic fiction?
Okay, so I did a quick survey after you told the topic last week. I interviewed around 5 people, those who read both fantasy and realistic fiction, and I want to, represent their views and then add mine. So most of them feel it is fantasy is a transition from fantasy as a childhood. They usually there's a transition to the realistic at a later life. When they're growing up, though they love fantasy fiction, they go to realistic fiction at a later stage. It's more like a maturation. So that happens. And those who still vouch for fantasy are they do it for the entertainment. They love the creativity, the wide scope of imagination. And for many, it is like an icebreaker. Okay, you read this, I also read this. It's like an icebreaker. So children who are withdrawn or who are not able to break the ice or to communicate, many times these books becomes like that icebreaker. We have some common interest to make friends and to get into to find that friend for them, for that friend circle. So it does help them to talk about books as an icebreaker, so they really like it. And one of the child told that it's whether it is realistic or fantasy, they identify with the character. So if the character is someone very close to them, very similar to them, and many situations, okay, how did they face this situation, how did they make this decision, it actually influences them. But all of them have told that it's the realistic fiction, it leaves a mark, that has more impact on them. And one senior professor told that one thing with fantasy fiction is there is no logical thinking developing there. So the problem solving ability and logical thinking ability is very unrealistic. It's not that you fall and get up without an injury, or you can just think of flying and you can fly. So it's not like some like a old age experiment on Tom and Jerry. The children who watched Tom and Jerry were actually seen supporting violence more than those who watched other series, because nothing happens to Tom and Jerry, though they fall, they get smashed. So they think it's okay to so the logical thinking is not there much in fantasy fiction, whereas in realistic, so the actual problem solving, actual logical thinking. And coming to that sort of your book, we have a small book here. So this is Shamala supported helped us to publish this. This is on parenting. So Element H has released 3 books by now, one on parenting, one on self-care, which is not with me right now.
Is it on Amazon?
Congratulations.
Yes,
Amazon.
Available as an ebook.
Yes, it's a
These are
ebook. Yeah.
really
So one is
needed.
parenting, one is on self-care, and now we have released this year on personal growth. So each week we have an activity. So regarding the life skills, I think if we can combine books like how we are giving on actually how to develop activity-based, I think it will be great for children to develop that life skills as well. And my suggestion, since we have authors here, if we can integrate, see, psychology has so much solution, counseling has so much, and we are talking to people only with intense problems, not even day-to-day problems.
Parenting book.
Right? So we have people with intense problems coming to our clinic, but there are many more who need help. And if we can have books which will inculcate these therapeutic elements into it, it would be really helpful for the readers as parents, and maybe it can also help as a marketing. I'm just suggesting. But if we can
I'm
collaborate, take inputs, it will be great, I think. Yeah.
I'm offering to co-author one book with you.
Definitely. Yeah.
Ramin,
If,
Already.
you're
if
in
you
line.
agree.
You're in line. We're already
No, I
working on
do get,
something
yeah.
together.
Yeah.
No, I do get calls from there were a couple of authors who wanted to write a fiction, and they wanted me to describe a particular illness so that the main character has that illness, and so because of the illness, how they carry out and all that. So
Hey,
it
I
is
don't
not.
want to, Sandhya,
Yeah.
I do not want to do a fiction with you. I want to
Okay.
do a parenting book with you.
Oh, that will be great. That will be great.
Yeah.
So definitely will
Yeah,
do.
we are running short of time now. So on behalf of the entire Kalinga Lit Fest team, I'd like to thank all the viewers. If you'd
Where's my
like to,
poem?
yeah,
My
it's coming,
poem.
it's coming. Let me finish with the important messages first. Okay, so in case you'd like to leave some feedback for the Kalinga Lit Fest and about the Samvad series, do drop in a line to Mr. Rashmi Ranjan Parida at kalingalitfest directorate at the rate of gmail.com. These are tough times for us, so in case you'd like to promote and offer sponsorships for any of the future events of the Kalinga Fest, please reach out to Mr. Rashmi Ranjan Parida. And if you'd like to know more about Mrs. Deepa Agarwal, you can log on to www.deepaagarwal.net. Ramin is available at www.ramendra.in. You can reach out to Sandhya Rani Ramdas at www.elementedge.in, and I'm available at www.shamla.in. And we would like to end the session with a poem. Yeah, Ramin, are you
Finally.
ready?
Finally, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Are you ready?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So actually, I'm not a poet by any stretch of imagination, but these dystopian times sometimes elicit a dystopian response. So this is dedicated to our great friend Corona the virus. Okay, it's titled "The COVID Question." Am I clear? Audible?
Oh, yes.
You all have to clap very hard. My daughter is sitting here. She thinks this poem is not that good, though she gave the voiceover, so she should be able to hear the clapping. Thanks. Okay, the COVID question: the sweeper on the street, the cop on the beat, the doc checking the pulse, the hassled and tired nurse, the journo breaking the news, even as chaos cuts loose. The ward boy, the cleaner, the cook, who don't merit a second look. The ward boy, the cleaner, the cook, who don't merit a second look. The driver, the delivery guy, the courier, each one a COVID warrior, each one a selfless savior. They are only doing their job. We reason, sitting in our haven. While they live in pieces, we are happy in our zen. While they live in pieces, we are happy in our zen. Treated like pariahs in every place, they are denied their due in every space. The best among us feel a tug of sympathy. The worst become a part of brutal mob frenzy. We forget the warrior too has a family waiting out there, ensnared in a gossamer fabric of a bit of hope and lots of fear. Even in this hour of viscous gloom, people and nations are fighting while the world turns dystopian. They are at windmills a tilting. As I see the savage apathy spilling everywhere, there is a thought with you I'd surely like to share. Do we as a species really need to survive? Do we as a species really need to survive or just wither away and gasping for breath die? Before saving the world from any bizarre virus, before saving the world from any bizarre virus, we need to save the earth from you, me, and us. Thank you.
Dystopian indeed. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks
So
a
a
lot.
request to the viewers, in case you have any comments or questions, please tag us and drop your questions in the comment section, because this session has been recorded live, has been viewed live on many platforms. We may not be able to see the questions. So drop your questions in the comment section and we will try to answer them at the earliest. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Okay. So
Thanks a
bye.
lot.
Thank
Yeah.
you,
And thank
Shamla.
you,
Yeah.
Shamla,
Bye.